Hey guys, Brian from Brian Boas here. One of the most common topics that's discussed on the online boa forums and on Facebook are questions about how to feed your boa. Probably the number one question is how often should I feed my boa? But then there's questions also about the proper prey size, whether to feed live versus frozen thawed food items, and other issues. So today I wanted to provide you my own opinions on a number of these issues. I also want to show you boa constrictors of different ages that are currently growing up, so you can have a pretty good idea about what size boa to expect given a proper feeding regimen. Many people try to grow their boa constrictors too fast, so I want to show you today what kind of expectations you should have about the growth rate of these animals given a proper feeding regimen. If you like this video, please subscribe to the Brian Boas YouTube channel for more videos on all aspects of keeping and breeding boas in captivity. The first question I want to cover is probably the most frequently asked, which is, of course, how often should I feed my boa constrictor? And there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. Judging from comments on Facebook and on the online boa forums, people have a tendency to overfeed their boas. Overfeeding a boa can lead to a lot of different health problems, from regurgitation to obesity to heart issues and early death. So it's very important you don't overfeed your boa. I remember as a kid in the 80s, the first time I had a pet boa, at the time it was thought that boas should eat once a week. We know now though that that's far too frequent, and feeding a boa once a week can lead to some serious health problems. So I'm going to give you a very general schedule of how often to feed your boa. And so I'll start off when the boas are born up until they're about 2 to 3 years of age. I'll feed them every other week, once every 2 weeks. The size of the prey item that I feed them leaves a barely visible bulge. I don't want to give them the largest rodent that they could hypothetically eat. I want something that is smaller than that. And you should see the bulge maybe for a few days, and then you don't see the bulge. And you know that's the right prey item. You don't want to see this huge fat snake with this big bulging its abdomen. So when they reach between 2 and 3 years of age, I back off to every 3 weeks, once every 3 weeks. And by then they're eating a larger size prey item, typically 1 or 2 sizes up from what they start at. And then when they reach sexual maturity, I feed them about once every 4 weeks. So that's at age 5 or older. So 1 prey item every 4 weeks. And this is a very general rule of thumb. Every snake is different. Some snakes have a faster metabolism and they can grow faster than others. So you have to use your common sense. You want the animals to have a slow but steady growth rate. So in general, most boas, you want to have about 1 foot or so of growth per year. The dwarf boas and the true redtail boas are going to be growing at a slower rate than that. But for most common boas and morph boas, you're looking at about 1 foot or so per year. So of course there was a lot of pressure in the past to get boas to breeding size really fast. And I'm really shocked by how young a lot of people are breeding boas. I've even seen claims of boas as young as 18 months that are being bred. This might be possible. It's probably not ideal, of course, to grow a boa this fast. When you feed a boa too fast to get it up to breeding size, this is called power feeding. And you might be able to produce a few babies a little bit earlier than you would have without doing it, but ultimately that snake is not going to live very long, and it's going to have all kinds of health issues from the power feeding. So now I want to show you a couple pairs of boas, and these are holdbacks that are currently being grown up, and in each case these guys are a year apart. So first I have a pair of Hog Island Boas. This is a 2019 baby. This is a 2018 baby. So they're a year apart. This one is about 8 months old. This one is about a year and 8 months old. So you can see the relative sizes of these animals when grown properly with every other week feeding. So this 2019 baby is about 2 feet long, and she's currently eating a large hopper-sized mouse. Again, I don't feed the largest animal that the snake could eat. I feed a slightly smaller one to leave just a barely noticeable bulge. This older one she's about 3 feet long, and she's eating an adult-sized mouse. So again, the relative size difference. They're both still on the every other week feeding regimen. This particular animal I'll probably continue for about another year, and then she'll be put onto the every 3 week food regimen. So I want to show you another pair of holdback boas that are a year apart. These are Tarahumara Mountain Dwarf Boas. These guys are actually a year older than the Hog Islands I just showed you. This is a 2018 baby who's about a year and 7 months old. This is a 2017 baby who's about 2 years and 7 months old. So you can see, because these are dwarf boas, their growth rate is even slower. I would say that this one is maybe 2.5 feet or so. This one is probably about a little over 3 feet. With the dwarf boas, it's especially important not to overfeed them, because they're not genetically programmed to grow very big. If you overfeed them, you're going to get all kinds of health issues. This particular animal, the smaller one, the 2018 baby, is currently eating small adult mice. The 2017 baby I have on larger adult mice. The 2018 baby eats every other week. The 2017 baby is now on a once every 3 week food schedule. So now I want to show you a pair of Suriname true Redtail Boas that are a year apart in age. This is a 2018 baby who is about a year and a half old. And here we have a 2017 baby who is about 2.5 years old. So you can see the relative size comparison of these animals when they're fed on a proper slow growth feeding schedule. So the younger animal is eating every other week, and this animal is eating small adult mice. The older animal eats every 3 weeks, and she's now eating large adult mice and small rats. And I would say that the smaller animal, or the younger animal, is just short of 3 feet long. The older animal is probably about 3.5 feet long. So with the true Redtail Boas, it's especially important not to overfeed them, because a lot of health problems can occur if you overfeed them. When you look at them in cross section, they should be very square. They should have this almost shape of a loaf of bread in cross section. So you can see this animal is kind of flattened. It's definitely not round. It's kind of got this very square cross section to it. I see a lot of pictures online of these very round looking true Redtail Boas. So if your animal is round, or if it's got any of these, sometimes you'll see these rolls of fat towards the end of the tail. That's definitely an animal that's been overfed. So again, very important not to get an animal in that kind of a shape, because it can be very bad for its health. I want to show you one more Suriname true Redtail Boa. This animal is a 2016 holdback. This guy is about 3.5 years right now, and he's about 4 feet long. This is the age at which the true Redtail Boas start to get this really cool muscle definition that they'll have as an adult. Their body starts looking even more square in cross section. You can see that, you know, the top versus the sides, there's this very square looking appearance. The animal is taller than he is wide. Okay, you can see they're kind of laterally compressed a little bit, but they don't have a round look to them like some overfed boas do. So if your boa looks round in cross section, chances are it's overfed. Another thing to look for is when you look at the sides of a healthy true Redtail Boa, you'll see this indentation right there running in the middle of the side, just showing off the muscle definition. And if you can't see this in a true Redtail Boa, there's a pretty good chance that it's overweight. So again, it's very important not to overfeed true redtails, they take about a minimum of 4.5 years to get to breeding size for the males and about 5.5 years for the females. If you push them to try to grow them too fast, you might be able, I've heard people getting them up to like 8 feet in a few years. But these boas are overweight and they're not going to make very good breeders, and odds are pretty good that they're going to die at a young age from the health issues like, heart issues and other effects. Another issue with overfeeding true red tails is something known as regurgitation syndrome. And this typically happens during the first year of life of the animals. So if an animal is fed more often than about every 2 weeks, in my experience, there's a very high likelihood that it will regurgitate its food about 3 days after feeding. So you come in, you notice this really disgusting smell, and you'll see what looks like either a dead, soggy rodent, or in some cases just kind of a hairball that's been regurgitated. And that's because the boa vomited it up because its digestive system hadn't cleared the previous meal in time. So if you put too much food in a true red-tailed boa, it's not going to be able to digest it, and it's going to have that regurgitation. If you have one regurgitation, it's typically not that much of a problem. You just need to give the animal time to recover, a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks before the next feeding. But often people will feed again like a week later because they're anxious for their boa to just be eating the food. And whenever you feed too soon after regurgitation, there's a very high likelihood you're going to have a second regurgitation. If you have a second regurgitation, you probably will enter this cycle where the snake is not able to get out of that. And animals in this cycle typically end up dying within a couple months. So really not a cycle that you want to go down. So for that reason, I only feed my baby true red-tailed boas every other week, and I haven't had any issues with regurgitation since I introduced this regimen. And I'll probably cover regurgitation in a future video talking about the husbandry of neonate boas. So I want to stress that every boa is an individual. They're going to grow at their own particular growth rate. So you have to carefully monitor your boa's growth and adjust its feeding schedule appropriately. So I'm here with 2 boas that are the same age. These are both 2014 babies. They're now about 5.5 years old. And so this Call albino male was actually my first morph boa. And one of the things I noticed about him pretty quickly was how fast he was growing. So this was given the same exact every other week food schedule that my other boas were receiving, but somehow he was growing much faster. And then this is a female Suriname true red tail. And I noticed with her pretty quickly about how, he's getting away here, about how slow she was growing. So I was feeding her every other week, but she just didn't seem to grow very fast. And in fact, for the first couple of years, it almost seemed like she wasn't growing at all. So this animal is probably about 4 feet now, so she's not going to be a big adult Suriname. She might put on another foot or so, versus this Call albino is well over 6 feet. And what's unusual, this of course is a male, and the males typically don't get as big. So had this been a female, she might be even bigger. So the point is, every boa grows at its different rate. You want to adjust the food so you have slow, steady growth. This guy I've had on a once-a-month food schedule for about the last 1.5 years. He's just gotten so big so fast. Whereas this girl is still on an every 3-week feeding schedule, even though she's almost 6 years old. I probably will put her on an every month next year. She probably will be ready to breed. Now, I haven't decided yet. It depends on how my breeding schedule is going to look. But you can see Suriname sometimes can take 6 years plus to get to breeding size. So take your time, be patient. This is really, it's a long-term project to breed these true red-tailed boas. So here's a 2017 2.5-year-old VPIT positive albino. So you can see this guy is you know, the compressed body. This guy's in really good shape for his age. I'm going to cover just a couple of miscellaneous topics regarding feeding. The first is what species of prey item do you recommend to feed? I've fed basically mice and rats, and my snakes have done quite well eating these items. I've also fed quail to my subadult and my adult boas. Typically I'll feed them an appropriately sized quail a few times a year just to mix it up so they're not getting just rodents. They seem to enjoy it and kind of adds variety. Another thing you might want to look into are these African soft-furred rats, which are a little bit smaller than the regular Norway rats. The shape is a little bit different. I've been interested in them, but I actually haven't seen them for sale. I think they actually might be illegal in California. But if you have them in your area, you might want to check those out. And then some keepers will feed very large boas appropriately sized rabbits. I actually haven't had to feed rabbits. The largest boa that I've had has been about 9 feet long, and I fed those animals jumbo-sized rats. Rabbits tend to be more expensive per animal than the rats, or even, you know, per ounce of meat, of prey item for the snake. You can also try chickens. Small chickens will be okay. I actually do have a large python that eats full-grown chickens, but you know, my boas of course aren't big enough to eat those. The only prey item I would definitely stay away from are guinea pigs, because guinea pigs have a much higher fat content than other rodents, and they can give your boa all kinds of health problems if you feed it to your boa. The other question is about feeding live versus a frozen thawed rodent. And I would recommend whenever possible to only feed the frozen thawed rodents. We've all heard the horror stories about live rodents which will turn on the snake, and you know, the snake doesn't eat the rodent ends up eating the snake. And there's a lot of these really horrific pictures of snakes that have just gotten hacked up into pieces by these hungry rats and mice. So you definitely don't want to leave a live rodent unattended in your snake cage. The only time I'll feed live rodents is with some of my babies that are picky. They don't want to eat frozen thawed from the beginning, especially with some of the dwarf boas and the island boas. So I'll start those guys off for the first few meals with a live fuzzy or live small hopper mouse. And then after they've eaten a few meals, I'll use a freeze-thawed mouse. Typically I have to jiggle it in front of them and kind of convince them that it's alive or they're not interested in it. And even after they strike it, they might release it, you know, when they figure out it's not alive. And then I got to go through the process again. And I'll usually have to do that a few feeding times before they'll just take the frozen thawed rodent without any jiggling. But typically my baby island boas are going to eat live for the first 3 to 6 months, and then they're onto the frozen thawed rodents. And then the last item I'm going to cover is whether you should breed your own rodents or you should buy rodents. And this is a highly personal decision. I know buying rodents is very expensive. The prices seem to be going up constantly, and the price for the shipping. I mean, I remember when you could buy a jumbo rat for like $1, and you know, those days are long gone. However, it's also more and more expensive to produce your own rodents. To produce rodents, you need a lot of space, you need a lot of time. You might find that you're devoting more time to your rodents than you are to your snakes, and you know, do you really want that? The other issue is that rodents smell really bad, and unless you're, you know, cleaning the cages very regularly, you're going to have that smell. And then of course they have a tendency to escape. You can have mice running around, you can have disgruntled family members. So just some things to consider. For me, I only breed a few tubs of mice, and I do that just so I can have a regular supply of live fuzzies and hopper mice that I use to feed to my babies, my baby boas. But I've never bred rats, and in general, I really don't have the time or space to devote to rodent breeding because I so invested in all my snakes, and I have to put the time and space into the snakes. And then when I look at the cost that it costs me to produce my mice, I don't think I'm really even saving any money, especially when you consider all the time I have to put into it. Those are my recommendations on how to feed your boas. Remember, you want to achieve a slow, steady growth rate in your boas. Breeding boas is really a long-term project, and it should take a minimum of about 4 years or so to reach adulthood for most locality boas. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, you can write them below, and you can also feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for watching, and enjoy your boas.